On the 4th of November 2009, Pope Benedict XVI addressed a general audience in St. Peter's Square on the theological controversy between Saint Bernard of Clairvaux and Peter Abelard. The Holy Father spoke on the 12th century monastic theology and scholastic theology they defended, and cited the conflict as born from a theology of the heart and theology of reason. After the better part of a millennia, the conflict between Peter Abelard and the wider church over his philosophy on scholasticism is still discussed. What was it about the beliefs and teachings of the monk that brought about such scathing critiques from his contemporaries? How could simply focusing on the church and God through a different lens result in such criticism? How could a monk, viewed historically as a staunch defender of the faith, be considered a heretic by those whose communion he so desperately sought to expand? Throughout the Middle Ages, the Christian Church was, for the most part, considered sacrosanct. From peasants to aristocrats, all bowed their heads to God. Those who opposed or questioned the Church were met with heavy scrutiny, and it is into this world that we first meet the French philosopher Peter Abelard. Born into a minor noble family, the then Pierre Lapalette was the eldest son of the knight Berenger. Despite his father's military career, Berenger saw much promise in his son and insisted that Peter instead pursue the life and study of the arts. Peter took to that liberal arts life with passion and quickly developed an appetite for the logical works of Aristotle. Aristotle's explorations of nature from a more critical standpoint would no doubt come to fuel some of the fledgling monk's own ideas on not only the world around him, but the spiritual world that he would later devote his life to. As Abelard entered his early 20s, his studies and the travel they inspired saw him venture to Paris, where he attended the Cathedral School of Notre Dame. The young monk's proponent interest in dialectic debates quickly found Abelard in opposition to his teachers. While Bishop William of Champeaux warned his fledgling student against the dangers of guile, Abelard would go on to found his own school, at which his reputation as both a teacher and critic began to draw attention. Despite William's influence in the growth of Abelard's fame, the bishop would condemn his former pupil, touting his arrogance as dangerous. But however great the rift between William the bishop and Peter the monk became, it would prove as little more than a crack in the sidewalk to the chasm that opened up between Abelard and Bernard of Clairvaux. Throughout Peter Abelard's life, he dedicated his approach to theological study through the lens of scholasticism. No doubt a result of his dialectic upbringing from the wisdom of Greek philosophers in the ancient world, the scholastic insistence on applying logic and reason to matters of faith polarized the theories postulated by Abelard's critics. Abelard insisted that proper understanding of God stemmed from the rational mind. In his writings, Abelard proposed that true knowledge and understanding of God would first have to qualify or justify God in a framework that could then be discovered. Abelard argued that this discovery would be a result of divine illumination, a belief similar to that proposed by St. Augustine that claimed a spark of the divine was necessary to conduct proper cognitive thought. Abelard's writings and theories went further, however, and proposed that the divine spark within that illumination could have led some pre-Christ thinkers into communion with the divine. This mandate, this idea of pagan salvation as a result of illumination through reason, drew heavy attacks from those who considered the proposition of such a philosophy to be nothing short of heresy. Abelard's work would come under further scrutiny after the publication of his teachings. Charged with heresy by Ulbrich of Rheims and Lutolf of Lombardy, Abelard was found guilty during a church council held in Soissons. As a result, Abelard was forced to personally burn his manuscripts, and in an attempt to stifle the growth of his ideas in the wider church community, he was sentenced to perpetual confinement within the Soissons monastery. Abelard was able to find some grace with his sentence, however, and rather than resigning himself to the confines of the monastery grounds, he instead opted for the life of a hermit. Retreating into the wilderness of north-central France, his isolation would be short-lived as his whereabouts became known to many Parisian students. Their numbers resulted in the foundation of the Oratory of the Parcelet. At his newly founded Benedictine monastery, the philosopher would once again resume his teachings. In spite or even perhaps because of his pervasiveness within the intellectual and theological world, Abelard's methodology and syllabus once again fell under heavy criticism for the marriage of his monastic life and that of his secular arts. But it was not only the marriage of his artistic and theological lives that would cause Abelard issues throughout his time in the Church's eye, for cloistered behind the public curtain dwelt a far more tenebrous affair. It would be remiss for any history of Abelard and his teachings to omit from its annals the near-legendary romance between the monk and the Lady Eloise. While the love affair between Abelard and Eloise might not directly constitute an expression of Abelard's heretical rejection of the church doctrine from the perspective of scholastic theology, it nonetheless provides an insight into the mind of a man caught betwixt the passions of the flesh and that of the mind. That being said, by all accounts, Eloise was by no means a mind of any less remark than that of her lover. Abelard himself writes of the renown her grasp of languages had earned her before even the two became involved in a more romantic setting. Throughout their lives, the two engaged in what Eloise would come to describe as a contractual form of prostitution. Her comments did not betray a sense of ire, however, as can be found in the letters she sent to Abelard. She states that she preferred love to wedlock, freedom to a bond. While there remains some conjecture as to the true nature of Abelard's romantic desire towards Eloise, the two did marry, albeit in secrecy, but how the two viewed each other at the end of their lives fugues far more into ambiguity. In their epistolary treatises, historian Peter Goodman states that their love affair, for what it was, ran counter to the very ideals they held as proponents of monastic lifestyles. While Eloise admitted freely that she felt no initial desire to enter nunhood, she did give herself over to celibacy upon her entrance into the convent, later becoming abbess. Abelard, however, if on account of his castration, stated that it was better to face the purgatory of a never-ending Lent than the infernal pangs of shame. Despite his own guilt in the same regard, Bernard of Clairvaux accused Abelard of not upholding the true notion of a monk due to his sexual proclivity. The hypocritical nature of both Abelard and Bernard's actions with regards to matters of sexual desire strikes a rare, yet mutual grey in the contrast between what each considered to constitute a monastic lifestyle. Whatever the rationale behind Abelard's actions towards Eloise, be it a forbidden love, an intended annulment, dialectic compatriot, or simple lust, the two undoubtedly challenged the cultural normatives of 12th century life. Their endeavours to explore the philosophical nature behind the cura monialium, the care of nuns, finds veneration even hundreds of years later. Undoubtedly, one of the greatest points of conjecture Abelard formulated throughout his career was his notion on the Trinity. Abelard's teaching on the nature of the Holy Trinity was considered by many to amount to heresy. Abelard's theology behind formulating an understanding of the Trinity, its components, how to categorize them, and what those categorizations mean, was the main point of order called into question by Bernard. Bernard's accusation of the monk refuted his insistence on trying to apply logic to scenarios where it should be by faith that the heart be guided. Adverse to the perversion of scripture that he accused Abelard of inhabiting, Saint Bernard insisted on the necessity of experience to qualify one's understanding of God in the form of speculative mysticism. The discourse between the two ideologies quickly soured, and after Bernard lobbied the bishops called together by the Archbishop of Sens in preparation for a debate between the dialectic and the mystic, Abelard was quickly found to be in opposition to church doctrine. While Abelard would try to rally support from Pope Innocent II, his efforts would prove in vain, and the monk found himself excommunicated from the church and his books ordered destroyed. This order, thankfully, was never truly followed out, however, thanks to the compassion of Peter the Venerable, Abbot of Cluny. For all the animosity between the two throughout their lives, Peter Abelard and Bernard of Clairvaux would eventually reconcile, and with his expulsion reneged, Abelard lived out the last years of his life in the care of Peter the Venerable, where he was once again widely recognized as a prolific scholar. Always in the pursuit of understanding, it serves as a testament to his legacy that his final words would reinforce so much of his efforts throughout his life. I do not